I woke before the call to prayer, long before even the light had begun to stir. The world was wrapped in a silence so deep it felt sacred, like the hush inside the heart just before it breaks open or begins to sing. My eyes opened not from urgency, but from a gentle invitation, an inward pull that called me not to thought, but to presence. I remained still at first, beneath the linen cover that still held traces of the night's warmth. My breath was slow, rhythmic, as though some older part of me already knew what lay ahead in this new day. Beyond the small window carved into the mud-plastered wall, the faint breath of the tigress curled its way into my room, cool and full of secrets. I could hear it in the distance, murmuring as it passed over stones and reeds, a lullaby that had soothed empires into forgetting and remembrance both. I rose with care, not to disturb the sleeping world, or perhaps not to disturb the stillness inside me. My feet met the cold earthen floor like the first step after prayer, measured, conscious, holy. I reached for the robe draped over the cedar hook and wrapped it around my shoulders, then moved to the threshold of the doorway that opened onto the garden. The door itself was open, as it always was, for what wall can keep out the spirit when the heart is willing? The curtain swayed lightly in the breeze, its edges trailing along the ground like a quiet blessing. I stepped past it and entered into the half-lit sanctuary that had always awaited me. The garden. Ah, the garden. It is not merely a place, it is a conversation. With every breath of wind, with every rustle of branch and bloom, it speaks in the language of the soul. The dew had gathered on every blade of grass and every leaf, small glass jewels catching the faint suggestion of dawn. They glistened, not just with light, but with something more, promise, perhaps. The fig trees towered silently like sentinels from another world, their wide leaves still holding night's darkness in their folds. Beneath them, the smaller plants had begun to stir. Morning glories lifted their soft faces as though waiting for an unseen beloved to kiss them awake. I knelt down beside a bed of white lilies, their petals still closed in sleep. I could not bear to touch them, they seemed too intimate, as though opening them prematurely would be like reading a sacred letter never meant for another's eyes. Even in their stillness, they told stories. I watched them for a long time, and in them, I saw myself, how often I had remained close to the sunlight of possibility, how often I had feared opening too wide, fearing hurt, fearing loss, fearing that I would not be beautiful when revealed. And yet here they were, ready to bloom, not despite the darkness of the night but because of it. The night had made them stronger. So, too, with the heart. As I stood again and walked further in, I felt the subtle power of the garden surround me. It is not the kind of power that men seek, the kind that conquers lands or raises voices in palaces. No, this was the power that makes a seed split apart and trust the soil. The kind that coaxes a vine to climb a stone wall just to reach the light. The kind that transforms decay into bloom. Every flower, every tree, every stone beneath my feet was an emblem of something that refused to be confined. I thought of all the limits I had once believed in. This is who I am, this is all I can become, this is the line between joy and sorrow, between the sacred and the mundane. But here, in this space where nature danced freely and purposefully, those lines began to blur. A hummingbird darted past me, its wings invisible in their speed, its body suspended as if by pure will. It hovered near a cluster of orange blossoms, then drank deeply without hesitation. It did not measure, did not fear, did not doubt. It simply followed the call of beauty and nourishment. I stood watching it, and I could not help but smile. Is that not what we are meant to do? Not calculate the worth of each path, but follow where the fragrance of truth leads us. I wandered to the stream that ran through the heart of the garden, fed by the same great river I had heard from my chamber. The water here was smaller, but not lesser. It was clearer, more playful, skipping over pebbles and weaving through roots like a child at play. I sat beside it, and as the sun began to warm the sky behind me, I placed my hands in the water. The coolness climbed up my arms and into my chest, as if the river had decided to baptize my thoughts. I felt the solidity of stone and the softness of moss beneath the surface. I saw tiny fish darting in and out of shadows. I closed my eyes and let the sound of it all enter me. In that stillness, I heard a truth that had long whispered at the edge of my awareness. The garden of the world has no limits except in your mind. It was not a sentence, not a philosophy handed down by mouth. It was a knowing, a pulse, a breath that came from the very bones of the earth. We are born not into boundaries, but into boundlessness. It is only our fears, our judgments, our memories and labels and rules that make us think otherwise. We imagine walls, and so we see them. We believe in impossibility, and so we stop before we even begin. But the rose does not question if it deserves to bloom. The sky does not measure how far it can stretch. The wind does not ask permission to pass. I opened my eyes, and the sun had risen, casting golden light through the lattice of olive branches overhead. The garden came alive in a new way, the colors richer, the air warmer, the sounds brighter. But I knew the transformation was not in the garden, it was in me. I had walked through the same paths, touched the same stones, and smelled the same blossoms many times before. But today, I saw them without the veil of limitation. Today, I stepped out of the prison I had built in my thoughts, brick by brick, and found that the key was never far. It had always been in my willingness to see. And so I stood in that dawn light, not as a scholar, not as a poet, not as anything the world had called me, but simply as a man who remembered, finally, that the world is as wide as I allow it to be. And with that remembrance, the garden opened. And so did I. I lingered in the grove long after the fruit had been tasted, as though time itself had chosen to sit beside me in quiet reflection. The half-eaten pomegranate rested on my lap like a sacred book left open mid-verse, its hollowed chambers exposed to the world, glistening faintly in the dappled sunlight. I traced the edge of the rind with my fingertip, slowly, reverently, as if reading the ridges of an ancient map. It had not just been a fruit, it had been a mirror. And in it, I had seen not only the garden's abundance but the reflections of my own self-imposed poverty, how often I had starved in the midst of plenty, thirsted while sitting beside rivers, wandered while standing still. The world had never been closed to me, it was I who had drawn curtains across my sight. Around me, the grove was alive with a chorus so subtle it could only be heard by stillness itself. The breeze danced through the high branches, shaking loose tiny sighs from the leaves. Somewhere to my left, a dove cooed gently, its sound soft as breath against skin. A cluster of ants moved purposefully along the base of a tree, carrying bits of husk and fallen flower petals as if transporting treasures. Everything had a rhythm, a meaning, a place. I saw that now. The pomegranate had not simply fed me, it had initiated me into a deeper seeing. It had cracked open not just its skin, but the casing around my own perception. I thought then of the children I had seen the day before, chasing one another down the dusty road near the mosque, laughing with such abandon that the sky itself seemed to echo with delight. How easily they lived in wonder. How quickly they saw the world not as a collection of fixed objects, but as a living dance. They could spend hours marveling at a beetle's journey across a stone or the way light fractured in a puddle. They had not yet learned to build the invisible walls that we, as adults, begin stacking brick by brick, walls of should and shouldn't, real and unreal, practical and impractical. Those walls narrow the garden until it becomes a corridor, then a cell, then a memory. But the children, the children, they still roamed the vast, infinite garden. I envied their freedom. The grove reminded me that such freedom was not lost, only forgotten. It could be remembered, not by the mind, but by the soul. Each fruit here bore the lesson of return. I looked up at the branches above me, heavy with more pomegranates, their weight bending the limbs earthward as though bowing in offering. How many such offerings had I ignored in my life? Not just from the garden, but from the people I loved, from moments I had hurried through, from silences I had refused to enter. We are surrounded by gifts every day, smiles that go unanswered, words that go unheard, beauty that goes unseen because we are too busy tending the fences in our minds. The pomegranate grove did not ask me to do anything extraordinary. It only asked me to notice, to be present, to receive. And when I did, I found that even time changed. I had sat beneath that tree for what felt like hours, but the sun had barely moved. I realized then that time, too, expands and contracts based on our awareness. In the shallow mind, time rushes, drags, vanishes. In the deep heart, it opens, stretches, sings. Here, with the taste of the fruit still dancing at the edges of my tongue, time had become like honey, thick, golden, slow. Each breath I took felt eternal. And perhaps that is the truest luxury we ever possess, to be so fully within a moment that it forgets how to end. A memory surfaced then, unbidden but welcome. I saw my father's hands as he once opened a pomegranate for me when I was a boy. We sat under this very tree, his robe dusted with soil, his voice gentle. I remembered how he had shown me to break it apart not by force, but by following the fruit's natural seams, how to listen to the way it wanted to be opened. Everything, he had said, has its own way of unfolding. The fruit, the world, the soul. I hadn't understood him then. I only remembered the taste. But now, decades later, his voice came back not as a memory but as a presence, and I realized he had planted more than trees in this garden. He had planted a way of seeing. A bee buzzed close to my ear and circled around the rim of the broken fruit, dipping its legs into the sticky sweetness. I watched it, not as a stranger, but as a fellow participant in this ceremony of living. It was not intruding. It was completing something I had begun. Life is not solitary. It is shared. Even in our most silent encounters with beauty, something else is always present, a bee, a breeze, a whisper from long ago. The fruit had not been meant for me alone. It had fed me, yes, but it would go on feeding others, soil, insect, memory, poetry. Nothing in the garden ends where it begins. I finally stood, cradling the emptied rind in my palm. I walked to a soft patch of soil near the grove's edge and knelt. With my fingers, I carved out a small hole and placed the remains of the fruit into the earth. I covered it gently, pressing the soil as if closing a letter. Not a burial, but a promise. That which gives of itself never truly dies. The seeds I had not eaten would rest now in the dark, and perhaps one day rise as new trees. It was enough. The garden had offered me its heart, and I had received it. And in doing so, something in me had already begun to bloom. As I rose to leave the grove, I did not feel like I was walking away. No part of me was leaving. Instead, the grove was coming with me, woven into my breath, etched into the rhythm of my steps. I would carry it into every word I spoke, every silence I honored, every person I touched. I had tasted the truth, and it was this: the garden of the world has no limits. The only fences that exist are the ones we imagine. And the moment we stop imagining them, we become as the fruit, whole, open, sweet, eternal. I remained near the pool long after the water had dried from my skin. My garments clung to my body in quiet agreement with the breeze, and the sun above, climbing with patient majesty, scattered golden dust through the leaves. The garden no longer appeared as it had before. Or perhaps I no longer appeared as I had before. I could not tell whether it was the world that had shifted or only my way of seeing it. But there was a profound difference now, not in color or shape or scent, but in meaning. Each stone was heavier with silence. Each leaf seemed to hum with secret prayers. The surface of the pool, which had once reflected only my face, now seemed to echo the entire sky, as though the heavens had reached down to kiss the earth and left behind their image. I sat once more at the water's edge, cross-legged, feeling the warmth of the ground beneath me. My fingers trailed absently through the grass, and I marveled at the smallness of each blade, how it rose from the soil with no need for applause, no desire for grandeur, and yet how perfect it was in its simplicity. The smallest things, I realized, carry the deepest truths. The pool, though no wider than a sleeping ox, had held the sky. And now, it held a stillness that refused to leave me. I thought of all the pools I had passed in my life, all the chances to see myself clearly, and had instead turned away. So often, we live in shallow waters, afraid to dive, afraid that what we might see beneath will undo the identities we cling to. But what is so frightening about being undone? What is so terrible about dissolving into something greater? We are taught to fear disappearance, to fear being without form, without boundary, but in truth, it is only when the shell dissolves that the essence is finally free. Like water, we are most powerful when we are not trying to hold a shape. That thought stayed with me like a gentle fire in my chest, warming parts of me I hadn't felt in years. A dragonfly skimmed across the pool's surface, its wings catching the sun and turning momentarily to glass. I watched it hover, then land on a stone at the pool's edge, its eyes large and unreadable. It stared at me, or through me, I could not tell. There was no fear in it. No urgency. Just presence. The kind of presence that requires no words, no explanation. It simply was. In that dragonfly's delicate stillness, I found myself growing quieter. My thoughts began to loosen their grip, drifting like leaves on the water, no longer demanding conclusions or meanings. The mind, that incessant architect of limitation, had finally grown tired and wandered off into the trees. In its absence, I did not feel lost, I felt returned. And then, without warning, a memory surfaced, not a dramatic one, but a quiet, almost forgotten afternoon. I was a child, no more than 7, walking beside my mother as she led me to a neighbor's orchard. I remember the feel of her hand, warm, sure, and soft, guiding me across the uneven path. I remember how she stopped to let me peer into a still puddle left from the night's rain. "Look," she said, "you can see 2 skies, one above and one below. But there is only one heaven." I didn't understand then. I laughed and splashed at my reflection, delighted by how my face broke into ripples. But now, sitting beside this ancient pool, I understood. We are not separate from the sky. We are reflections of it. We are pieces of heaven that have momentarily forgotten where we came from. I closed my eyes and let my breath deepen. The silence that surrounded me was no longer empty. It was full of whispers, full of listening, full of space. In that space, I sensed how many voices I had silenced in myself. The voice of wonder, the voice of joy, the voice of longing, the voice of surrender. I had buried them under logic, under roles, under duty. But here, in the garden, those voices were awakening again, each one timidly returning like birds after a long winter. And I welcomed them all. I whispered my apologies into the air, and the breeze accepted them without question. Eventually, I stood. Not out of restlessness, but out of readiness. I was no longer the same man who had first leaned over the pool and seen only his face. Now, I carried the sky within me. I walked along the stones that rimmed the water, careful not to disturb its perfect stillness. Each step felt like a prayer, though I spoke no words. I reached down and dipped my fingers into the pool one last time. The water was cool, calming, precise in its clarity. I touched it to my forehead, to my chest, and to the space just above my heart. Not a ritual taught by anyone. Just something I knew to do. As I began to walk back into the garden's heart, I did not look back. Not because the pool no longer mattered, but because it had already come with me. It had entered my eyes, my breath, my bones. I felt as though I had become a reflection myself, not of a fixed identity, but of something greater, more fluid, more infinite. I remembered again the truth, that perception is not reality. That the world we see is only the echo of what we believe. And I resolved then to believe in a wider world. A world without fences, without ceilings, without edges. A garden with no limit except that which I place in my mind. And just then, the wind picked up again, carrying with it the scent of lilies and the soft rustle of fig leaves. I lifted my arms slightly as I walked, letting the wind pass through me. I imagined I was the surface of the pool, reflecting nothing, holding everything. For the first time in a long while, I felt entirely free, not because I had gained something, but because I had let something go, the need to define myself. The need to understand. I was enough, as the pool was enough, simply by being still. Simply by being open. Simply by being. The rose lingered in my thoughts long after I left the crumbled wall behind. Its image was burned not only into my memory but into the deeper folds of my spirit, like the scent that remains on the hand long after the flower is gone. I did not walk far. The garden now pulsed around me with an awareness I had not known before. I had crossed some invisible threshold, not of place, but of perception. It felt as if the garden had accepted me, as though my soul had finally aligned with its rhythm. Every breeze that swept through the trees, every rustle of leaf, every insect's delicate hum felt not random, but orchestrated, as if the entire garden was part of a vast intelligence, one I had finally begun to hear. I slowed my steps, not from fatigue but from reverence. It felt improper to rush, as if I might trample the wisdom waiting to rise from the earth. I came to a patch where wildflowers had overgrown the stones, creating a mosaic of colors so brilliant that I paused without meaning to. Yellow daisies, deep blue cornflowers, violets, and bright poppies bent their slender necks toward the sun, trembling slightly in the morning breeze. I knelt again, as I had at the pomegranate tree, and placed both palms on the warm stones between the blooms. I lowered my head. I could not pray with words, they felt too narrow, but I offered my silence, and in that offering, a deeper prayer stirred. As I knelt there, I remembered a time when I had tried to tame beauty, how I had once arranged gardens to fit symmetrical designs, forced the unruly wildness of flowers into human geometry. I remembered how dissatisfied I had always been with those gardens, even when they won praise. They lacked something vital, something this patch now pulsed with. Here, no hand had curated the colors, no gardener had measured the spacing, no stone had been placed by rule or standard. And yet it was perfect. Not perfect in its flawlessness, but perfect in its aliveness. Nature does not need our permission to be beautiful. It simply is. And in this humble, unrolled patch of flowers, I felt beauty more deeply than in any palace courtyard I had ever seen. A butterfly, with wings so pale they shimmered like pearl, drifted past my face and landed on a violet. I watched its wings open and close slowly, rhythmically, like the breathing of a small god. It moved as if time had no authority over it, no haste, no worry. Its presence rewrote my own sense of pace. I no longer wanted to go anywhere. I only wanted to be. And perhaps that was the truest longing of the soul, not to reach, not to chase, but to rest fully in presence. To be like the flower that opens without audience, or the butterfly that lands without fear. I leaned closer to the flowers, breathing in their fragrances, some sweet, some subtle, some so faint they seemed to exist only for those willing to draw near. I placed my hand over a tiny sprig of white blossoms and marveled at how something so small could radiate so much grace. I thought again of the rose and its thorns, and now, in contrast, these tender petals felt like whispers, gentle truths offered without armor. Yet neither was greater than the other. The rose had taught me strength and pain and fierce beauty. These flowers taught me gentleness, patience, the quiet power of yielding. I realized then that the soul, like the garden, must contain both, the wildness of the rose and the humility of the daisy. Without one, the other is incomplete. As I stood again, my body felt different, lighter, as if I had shed a skin I never knew I wore. I walked further into the garden, and my hand found a vine trailing along the wall, green and alive, reaching endlessly upward. I followed it with my gaze to where it met the roof of an old stone pergola, mostly collapsed now, but still adorned with hanging moss and morning glories. I stepped inside its shade, and the air there was cooler, softer, like the breath of a sanctuary. I sat on a low stone bench, half covered in ivy, and looked around. In every direction, nature had reclaimed what time and man had forgotten. I ran my hand along the carved edge of the bench, weather-worn letters, half faded by the decades. I could barely read them, but what remained said enough. The soul grows where the wild things grow. I smiled. The rose had known this. The pole had known this. The wildflowers knew it too. It was I who had forgotten. We are taught to fear what grows beyond our control. We are taught to confine, to prune, to discipline the unruly parts of ourselves. But the soul is not a garden of straight paths and trimmed hedges. It is a wilderness meant to be explored with awe, not fenced in with certainty. And that was the true reason the rose had struck me, not just because of its beauty or its thorn, but because it had grown beyond the wall. It had refused the boundaries set for it. It had reached into open air, defied order, sought its own sun. That, I realized, was the invitation of the garden itself. Not to walk through it safely, admiring from a distance, but to become it. To grow wildly. To let the roots of my spirit sink deep into the soil of mystery. To bloom where I was not expected. To reach toward light I did not yet understand. The wall, the thorn, the bloom, all of them were metaphors, yes, but more than that, they were maps. And they pointed to the same truth, that the only limits that exist are the ones I believe in. The garden had no borders. The pool had no depth I could measure. The rose had no rules. Only my thoughts did. Only my fears built fences. I closed my eyes and let the stillness settle into me once more. In that shade, beneath the tangle of vines and thyme, I made a vow, not a loud vow, not one of declarations, but a quiet promise. That I would not live as a gardener of walls, but as a lover of wild things. That I would not fear the thorns of my life, nor hide from the blooms. That I would meet myself and others as they are, sometimes soft, sometimes sharp, always sacred. And as I rose once more to continue my walk, I left behind not just the bench and the broken pergola, but the last remnants of the belief that I was meant to live small. The rose had climbed the wall. And now, so would I. The morning light stretched longer now, pouring a golden spill over the garden as I stepped away from the ancient olive tree, my spirit still cradled in the quiet strength I had found beneath its branches. The air felt charged with a gentle vitality, as if the earth itself were breathing alongside me, alive and conscious. With every footfall on the soft moss and crushed leaves, I felt a deeper connection unfolding, a tethering not to place but to presence. The garden was no longer merely a space I moved through, it had become a living part of me, and I, a living part of it. I could feel the pulse of the soil beneath my feet, steady and sure, rooting me even as my thoughts began to scatter like wind-driven petals. As I walked further, the path narrowed and wove through a thicket of wild herbs, thyme, rosemary, lavender, each exhaling its own fragrant story into the cool morning air. I stooped to inhale deeply, letting the scents fill my lungs, grounding me in the moment with their ancient, healing wisdom. These small plants held memories older than any man, their leaves etched with stories of sun and rain, of seasons turning without need for human witness. I imagined that if I listened long enough, I might hear the faint whisper of their secrets, whispers about resilience, about quiet endurance, about the way life insists on blossoming even in harsh, forgotten places. I moved on and came upon a clearing where the sun pooled in warmth on a bed of soft grass, dappled here and there with tiny white daisies, their faces lifted as if in silent praise. I sat down, sinking into the earth's embrace, and closed my eyes. The garden was speaking now, not in words, but in feelings, an unspoken conversation between soul and soil. I felt a swelling of gratitude rise inside me, a profound recognition of how deeply intertwined I was with this world I had so often taken for granted. All the boundaries I had built in my mind, between myself and others, between spirit and matter, between the seen and unseen, began to dissolve like morning mist under the sun's gaze. In that moment of surrender, I understood that the garden's true gift was teaching me to see beyond illusion. The limits I had believed in, the fences I had accepted as real, were but shadows cast by my own fear and doubt. The garden itself knew no such limits. It stretched infinitely in every direction, an endless tapestry of life weaving together roots, leaves, and light. And as I opened my eyes, I saw this truth mirrored everywhere, in the way a spider's web shimmered with dew, in the dance of a bee from flower to flower, in the endless sky folding over the hills beyond the garden's edge. Everything was connected, infinite, and free. My heart swelled with a mixture of joy and humility. How often had I confined myself within narrow thoughts, clipped the wings of my spirit with worry and judgment? How often had I mistaken limitation for reality? Yet now, faced with the vastness of this garden, wild, untamed, limitless, I felt a call to let go, to embrace the unknown with open arms and an open heart. To bloom wildly, like the rose on the crumbled wall. To bend with grace like the ancient olive tree. To breathe deeply the sweet, fragrant breath of life, knowing that I belonged to this endless garden as much as the earth belonged to the sky. I rose, feeling lighter yet more grounded than before, and continued to walk with a new awareness, a sacred sense of belonging that transcended form and time. The garden was no longer a place apart, but a living reflection of the boundlessness within me. Every flower, every stone, every ray of sunlight carried a lesson, that the only true limits are those I place in my mind. And now, those limits were beginning to fade like shadows at noon. As I moved forward, I carried with me the garden's song, a song without words, full of life and freedom. And in that song, I found the courage to step beyond old fears and old boundaries, into a world without edges, where the spirit could roam freely and the soul could flourish without restraint. The garden had taught me that my mind was the last frontier, and that once it was opened wide, the whole world would bloom inside me, infinite and eternal. The sun climbed steadily, warming the garden as I continued my wandering, each step a deeper plunge into a world that seemed less like a place and more like a state of being. The earth beneath my feet was soft and alive, cushioned by centuries of fallen leaves and the gentle decay that nourished all that grew here. I paused to run my fingers along the rough bark of a cypress tree, feeling its sturdy presence, its silent endurance. The tree had weathered countless storms, its roots burrowed deep, anchoring it through the ages. There was a lesson in that steadfastness, a quiet reminder that true strength often lies in stillness, in patient endurance rather than in loud proclamation. I thought of the storms I had faced in my own life, the griefs, the losses, the moments when the world seemed to unravel, and I understood that, like this tree, I too could hold firm in the center of my own chaos. As I moved forward, the path curved gently downward into a shaded hollow where wild violets carpeted the ground. Their delicate petals seemed almost fragile against the backdrop of towering trees, yet their color was vibrant, a rich purple that spoke of mystery and depth. I knelt among them, letting my breath slow, matching the quiet pulse of the earth. There, in that moment of stillness, I felt the subtle hum of life beneath the surface, roots weaving silently in the dark soil, unseen yet endlessly busy, connecting every living thing in a secret network. It was humbling to realize how much happens unseen, how much strength and beauty is born beneath the surface, beyond the reach of eyes and words. The violets reminded me that the soul too has hidden depths, places where transformation unfolds quietly and unseen. We often search outward for change, for signs, for miracles, but the deepest growth occurs in the secret places of our hearts where we dare to be still. I closed my eyes and listened, to the whisper of leaves, to the distant call of a bird, to the beating of my own heart, and felt how every pulse was a thread in the tapestry of life. Here, surrounded by violet and shadow, I touched a part of myself I had long neglected, the part that waits patiently, that heals slowly, that blooms in its own time. As I rose, brushing the violets gently with my hand so as not to disturb their quiet congregation, I noticed a small creek nearby, its waters clear and singing softly as they traced their way over smooth stones. The sound was like a lullaby, and I was drawn to it, as if the creek held a secret I needed to hear. Kneeling at its bank, I dipped my fingers into the cold water, feeling its rush and flow, its ceaseless motion. The creek did not hurry. It did not resist the rocks or bends in its path. It moved with grace, adapting, yielding, finding the way forward not by force but by persistence and flow. I saw in its movement a metaphor for the soul's journey, not a straight line, but a winding path full of obstacles and beauty, a path where surrender does not mean defeat but wisdom. The water mirrored the sky above, shifting with clouds and light, reminding me that reflection is itself a form of transformation. Just as the pool had shown me my own face, distorted and fluid, so too does life reflect back the shape of our hearts, changing as we change. I cupped some water in my hands and raised it to my lips, tasting the freshness and clarity. It was simple, yet life-giving, a reminder that nourishment often comes in the most unassuming forms, if only we are willing to receive it. I sat by the creek's edge and let its song wash over me, letting go of thoughts and fears that no longer served. The water's movement invited me to release my own resistance, to stop clutching so tightly to control, to certainty, to the need to know. Instead, I was called to trust the flow, to move with the current of life even when the way was unclear. In that surrender, there was freedom. In that yielding, there was strength. Time lost its grip. The garden no longer marked hours, only moments, each one full and whole, complete in itself. I realized that the garden was not outside me, but within, and that every leaf, every stone, every ripple in the water was a mirror of my own inner landscape. The limits I had known were like shadows cast by my own mind's walls. But here, in the deep pulse of the garden's heart, those walls softened and fell away. Rising once more, I walked along the creek, feeling the cool air mingle with the warmth of the sun on my skin. I breathed deeply, embracing the paradox of stillness and movement, of strength and surrender, of shadow and light. The garden's lessons were becoming clear, that the soul's true journey is not about conquering or escaping, but about opening, receiving, and flowing with the endless garden within and without. With each step, I carried the creek song in my heart, a reminder that life's beauty and truth are found not beyond limits, but beyond the limits we place upon ourselves. The garden was infinite, as was I, when I dared to let go of the walls in my mind and step fully into the boundless mystery of being. I wandered deeper along the creek's gentle curve until I reached a small wooden bridge arching over the water. The wood was weathered, worn smooth by the passing of many feet and years, yet strong and steady, bridging two sides not with grandeur but with humble purpose. I paused on that bridge, peering down at the water swirling beneath, reflecting dapples of light like scattered jewels. Here was a crossing, an invitation to move from one place to another, not only in space but in spirit. I stepped slowly across, feeling the subtle shift beneath my feet, and with each step, I imagined crossing the invisible boundaries I had drawn within myself. On the far side of the bridge, the garden opened again into a sunlit meadow, where wild grasses swayed in the breeze, and distant hills rolled softly toward the horizon. The air here was lighter, filled with the sweet hum of bees and the chirping of unseen birds. I lay down in the grass, letting the earth hold me, and gazed upward into the vast, limitless sky. Clouds drifted lazily, shifting shapes in the endless blue, and I felt the deep truth settle within me like a seed ready to grow, that the garden of the world, and the garden within, has no limits except in the mind that refuses to see beyond its fears. As I lay there, cradled by grass and sky, I understood that freedom is not a place to reach but a way to see. It is the unshackling of the mind's tight chains, the breaking of invisible walls, the willingness to let the soul roam beyond old maps and familiar landmarks. In that surrender, I was home, not in a place, but in a boundless embrace that held all contradictions, strength and softness, certainty and mystery, silence and song. The garden whispered its eternal truth to me then, and I carried it deep within, knowing that no matter where my path would lead, no matter what storms might come, I had tasted the infinite. I had stepped beyond limits. And I was free. The meadow where I had lain beneath the endless sky slowly gave way as I rose and continued my journey deeper into the garden's embrace. Each step felt less like a movement across land and more like a passage through layers of my own being. The air was alive with the quiet murmurs of nature, the gentle rustling of leaves, the distant call of birds hidden in thick branches, the faint buzzing of insects busy with their daily rites. Every sound was a thread weaving me further into the vast tapestry of existence, a reminder that I was not separate from this living world but an integral part of its ongoing dance. The garden had become my teacher, and I was its humble student, eager to learn what it had to offer beyond the limits I had once believed immutable. As I wandered, I found myself drawn to a place where the sunlight filtered through the canopy in golden shafts, illuminating a small circle of ancient stones arranged in a deliberate pattern. They were weathered and moss-covered, their surfaces etched by time and elements, yet their presence was undeniable, a silent sanctuary that seemed to hold centuries of prayers, sorrows, and joys. I approached reverently, feeling the hum of history vibrating beneath my feet. The stones formed no barrier, no enclosure, only a sacred space inviting openness and reflection. I sat down among them, letting the rough edges press gently against my skin, grounding me in the here and now. Closing my eyes, I let the sounds of the garden envelop me. The breeze whispered secrets through the leaves, the earth beneath me hummed with ancient memory, and within that sacred circle, I felt the boundaries of self begin to blur. The garden was no longer outside or separate from me. It was the very pulse of my own soul, reflected and magnified. I felt a profound unity with all that lived and breathed, the stones, the trees, the sky above, and the unseen forces that wove them together. It was as if I had stepped beyond the illusion of separateness and into a vast ocean where individual waves and the boundless sea were one. In that moment of communion, I confronted the illusions I had carried, the fears that kept me confined, the judgments that shaped my world, the mental walls that said, "You cannot, you must not, this is impossible." These were but shadows cast by a narrow mind, false limits that had never belonged to the garden or to the soul. I realized that the true garden of the world was limitless not because the earth stretched infinitely, but because the mind, when freed from fear and illusion, could expand beyond measure. The ancient stones beneath me bore silent witness to this truth, reminding me that wisdom does not shout, it waits patiently, accessible to those willing to sit quietly and listen. I opened my eyes and gazed around the circle, noticing how the light played upon the moss and stone, how the subtle movements of the garden seemed choreographed in harmony. The scent of earth and leaf filled the air, a perfume born not of flowers alone but of life itself, the mingling of growth, decay, and renewal. I thought of how often I had sought limits for safety, boundaries to protect me from the unknown, yet here in this sacred circle, safety was found not in walls but in surrender. The garden taught me that true security arises when the mind lets go of control and opens to the vastness beyond fear. The stones reminded me of the journeys I had taken, not only through gardens but through the labyrinth of my own heart. Each step, each twist and turn had brought me closer to this realization, that the only prison is the one built by the mind. When I allowed that prison to dissolve, when I embraced the unknown with courage and trust, the garden revealed itself fully, an endless expanse of possibility, wonder, and grace. As the sun shifted, casting longer shadows, I rose from the circle with a renewed sense of purpose. The garden had shown me that the limits I had once accepted were illusions to be transcended, that the boundaries of my world were shaped only by the fences I held within. And now, standing among these ancient stones, I felt ready to walk beyond those fences, to live fully in the boundless garden both outside and within. Yet even as I rose, a deep quiet settled within me, a silence so profound it was almost palpable. I found myself lingering, not wanting to leave the sacredness of that space, as if the stones themselves whispered for me to remain a while longer. I sat back down, this time letting my back rest fully against one of the largest stones, cool and steady beneath me. I closed my eyes again, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath that stone, its ancient heartbeat in sync with my own. In the stillness, images drifted across my inner sky, faces and places, joys and sorrows, all part of the vast garden of my life. Each memory was a flower, some blooming brightly, others faded, yet all essential. I saw how many times I had let fear fence me in, how often I had mistaken limitations for truths, and how rarely I had dared to imagine a garden without walls. But here, within the embrace of these stones and the whispering trees, I felt the strength to unlearn those false beliefs. I felt the courage to begin again, to see the world and myself with new eyes, eyes that could behold infinity. Time lost all meaning as I sat there, absorbed in the boundless peace that comes when mind and soul align. The garden was no longer a place of mere beauty. It was a mirror reflecting the vastness of being, the limitless expanse waiting within every heart. And I knew then that the journey was not about reaching a final destination, but about awakening to the endless garden that surrounds and inhabits us all, inviting us always to grow, to bloom, to be free. Slowly, I rose once more, carrying this revelation gently in my chest. The stones stood silent guardians, their wisdom now woven into the fabric of my soul. I stepped away from the circle, feeling the garden stretch endlessly before me, a vast canvas of possibility. With every breath, every step, I embraced the truth I had uncovered, that the only limits that bind us are the ones our minds create, and that beyond them lies the infinite, the eternal garden of the world, waiting to be known. The garden's expanse seemed to deepen as the day wore on, and I found myself moving with a slow reverence, as if each step was a prayer offered to the earth itself. The sun hung high now, its light filtering through the thick canopy above, casting a mosaic of gold and shadow across the mossy ground. I felt wrapped in a timeless cocoon, a place both ancient and alive, where every leaf and stone whispered secrets older than words. As I walked, my mind swirled with the echoes of the lessons the garden had already imparted, the boundlessness beyond fear, the silent strength of surrender, the truth that the only limits are those we imagine. Yet, beneath these understandings, a new question stirred within me: how to live fully within this limitless garden, not merely as a visitor, but as a participant, a co-creator of its endless beauty. My feet carried me toward a thicket where wild jasmine climbed the gnarled trunks of trees, their delicate white blossoms exhaling a perfume so rich and intoxicating that I stopped to breathe it in deeply. The scent seemed to penetrate the very air around me, wrapping me in a quiet ecstasy. I reached out to touch a cluster of flowers, their petals soft as silk and glowing with an inner light. As my fingers brushed against them, I felt a ripple pass through me, as if the garden was speaking directly to my heart. It said, to belong here, to truly bloom within this boundless world, is to surrender to love, the wild, fierce, uncontainable force that underlies all creation. Love, I realized, was the invisible root system beneath the garden's surface, the source from which every stem and leaf drew life. It was not a tame or gentle love, but one that challenged and transformed, that broke down walls and dissolved boundaries. The rose climbing the crumbled wall, the olive tree weathering storms, the creek flowing over stones, all were expressions of love's myriad faces: resilience, surrender, persistence. And I, too, was called to embody this love, to open myself fully to the world's wildness and beauty, without fear or reservation. As I breathed in the jasmine scent, memories surfaced, times when I had held back, when I had tried to cage love in neat forms or words, when I had feared its power or misunderstood its depth. I thought of the lovers who had come and gone in my life, the moments of joy and heartbreak intertwined like the garden's vines. I saw how love had always been both my greatest teacher and my deepest wound, a force that shattered illusions and exposed the raw, tender core beneath. And yet, here in the garden's embrace, I understood that love was also the healing balm, the light that transforms pain into grace. I stepped away from the jasmine and continued along a narrow path lined with wild thyme and sage, their earthy fragrances mingling in the air. The path led me to a small clearing where a weathered stone bench rested beneath the arching branches of a fig tree. I sat there, letting my hands rest on my knees, palms open to the sky. The fig leaves above rustled softly, their shadows dancing across the ground like living script. I closed my eyes and let the garden's energy flow through me, the pulse of earth, air, water, and fire mingling in a sacred dance. In that sacred space, I felt the walls within me begin to crumble, the walls built of doubt, fear, and the false sense of separation. I saw clearly now that the garden's boundlessness was not a distant dream but a present reality, accessible to all who dared to love without limits. To love not only others but oneself, and the world in all its chaos and beauty. To love without condition, without expectation, without the desire to control or possess. This love was freedom, and freedom was the garden's true gift. Opening my eyes, I gazed upward through the fig tree's branches to the infinite sky beyond. I felt the sun's warmth on my face, the breeze's gentle touch, the earth's steady support beneath me. I understood that to live fully in the garden meant embracing all aspects of existence, the light and the shadow, the joy and the pain, the known and the mysterious. It meant moving beyond the limits of the mind's fears and opening to the vastness of the heart's capacity. Rising from the bench, I walked slowly through the clearing, each step infused with gratitude and reverence. The garden was no longer a place I wandered through. It had become my home, a reflection of the infinite love that dwells within and beyond all things. I felt a profound peace settle in my chest, a quiet certainty that no matter where life's paths might lead, I carried within me the limitless garden, the endless possibility of love without boundaries. As the afternoon light softened into gold, I whispered a prayer, not for protection or guidance, but for the courage to love wildly, without restraint, to live fully, without limits, and to become, in every breath and every moment, the boundless garden of the world itself. And yet, even as I spoke this prayer, I sensed that this love was not a static blessing but a living, breathing force demanding continual surrender. To love fully meant to risk vulnerability, to expose the softest parts of oneself to the fierce winds of change and uncertainty. It meant to love in the face of impermanence, to hold joy and grief in the same embrace, to find the sacred in both union and loss. The garden, with its blooming and withering flowers, with its ever-shifting light and shadow, was a constant reminder of this truth, that love's beauty lies not in its permanence, but in its wild, untamed dance with the unpredictable rhythms of life. I felt called to walk deeper into this dance, to let go of the need for certainty and control, and to open my heart wide as the sky above. The path ahead was not clear or straight, but I knew that with love as my guide, the journey would unfold as it should, each step a petal unfolding, each breath a song rising into the vastness. The garden had shown me that the only limits worth fearing are those that close the heart, and that beyond those limits waits an endless field of possibility, waiting to be loved into bloom. The garden grew quieter as the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the earth. The air cooled, carrying the faint scent of damp moss and fading blossoms. I felt the shifting of the day's energy, a gentle turning inward that invited reflection and surrender. Walking slowly, I traced my fingers along the rough bark of a towering walnut tree, its sturdy limbs reaching skyward as if embracing the fading light. There was something humbling in its presence, a steadfastness born not from rigidity, but from a graceful yielding to the cycles of nature. I realized then that to live without limits was not to defy change or resist the passage of time, but to dance with it, fluid, adaptable, open to the constant flow of transformation. As I moved deeper into the garden's quiet heart, I came upon a narrow path bordered by wild fennel and chamomile, their feathery leaves swaying gently in the evening breeze. The soft rustle was like a whispered lullaby, coaxing my restless mind toward peace. I bent down to touch the delicate flowers, feeling their fragility and resilience intertwined. Their blooms were brief yet brilliant, reminding me that even the most fleeting moments carry within them the fullness of life. How often had I sought permanence, clinging desperately to what I thought would last, only to find myself imprisoned by that very desire. The garden taught me that freedom comes from embracing impermanence, from opening my hands to let go and trusting the unfolding unknown. Further along, I found a small pond nestled among ferns, its surface mirror smooth, reflecting the deepening hues of twilight. I sat at its edge, mesmerized by the way the water captured the sky's fading colors, soft purples, dusky pinks, and the first shy stars. The pond held a quiet stillness, yet beneath its glassy calm, life teemed unseen, tiny water insects skimming the surface, tadpoles darting through the shadows, roots winding beneath the mud. It struck me how much life persists in places we often overlook, how the depths hold mysteries and vitality beyond our ordinary perception. This was the garden's gift again, a lesson in looking beyond the surface, in honoring the hidden currents that sustain us. As darkness deepened, I noticed a single firefly flickering nearby, its tiny light pulsing in the gathering dusk. It moved with an erratic grace, sometimes fading almost to invisibility, then flaring bright again. Watching it, I understood that even the smallest light matters, that in the vastness of the garden, indeed, In the vastness of the world, each spark of life holds meaning. The firefly's dance was a metaphor for the soul's own journey, moments of brilliance interspersed with times of quiet, a rhythm that does not conform to the rigid expectations of the mind but flows naturally with the beat of existence. The garden had become a mirror reflecting my inner landscape, a place where the endless cycles of birth, growth, decay, and renewal played out in every leaf and stone. I realized that my fears, my doubts, and my perceived limits were like shadows cast upon this vibrant stage, illusions that dissolved when met with awareness and acceptance. To live without limits was not to conquer or control, but to yield gracefully to the eternal dance of becoming. I recalled the many moments in my life when I had clung desperately to certainty, building walls of expectation and fear around my heart, believing these would protect me. Yet each wall had only imprisoned me, cutting me off from the vastness that the garden so effortlessly embraced. Here, among the ancient trees and whispered breezes, I learned that freedom came not from holding tight, but from letting go, trusting in the unseen forces that guide us beyond our own limited understanding. Rising from the pond's edge, I walked slowly back toward the garden's entrance, feeling the cool night air on my skin and the soft crunch of fallen leaves beneath my feet. The stars above shone with ancient light, and the moon, a pale crescent, hung low in the sky like a silent guardian. I carried within me the garden's profound lessons, its invitation to release fear, to embrace impermanence, to trust the hidden currents of life, and to honor the small lights that guide us through darkness. As I stepped beyond the garden's gate, I knew that its boundless spirit had taken root within my heart. The limits I once believed unbreakable had softened, revealed now as fleeting boundaries of the mind. And in their place bloomed a wild, limitless garden, an inner sanctuary of freedom, love, and endless possibility that would grow and flourish long after the sun had set on this day. Walking into the cool embrace of night beyond the garden, I felt a serene strength settle deep within me. The world stretched out before me, vast and mysterious, no longer confined by the narrow walls I had built in my mind. Every breath I took was a renewal, each step a testament to the freedom I had found. The garden's lessons echoed through my being, that life is a continuous unfolding, a dance with the unknown, that every ending holds the seed of a new beginning, and that the true boundaries exist only in the stories we tell ourselves. With this understanding, I embraced the night as part of the endless garden, a sacred space where light and shadow coexist, where the soul finds rest and renewal. I vowed to carry this boundless spirit into every corner of my life, to live as the garden does, open, fluid, and without limits. And as the stars wheeled overhead, I whispered gratitude to the garden of the world, knowing that its infinite beauty was now inseparable from my own heart's journey. The night deepened around me, a vast canopy of stars stretching endlessly into the darkness, each one a distant flame flickering in the infinite sky. I stood quietly, feeling the cool earth beneath my feet, solid and eternal, yet alive with unseen currents of life. The garden's lessons had settled deep within me now, like seeds planted in fertile soil, waiting to bloom into wisdom and grace. I realized that this garden, this boundless, limitless space, was not just a place I wandered through or a metaphor I pondered, but the very essence of existence itself, flowing through every breath, every heartbeat, every moment of my life. As I looked up at the stars, I felt a profound connection to all that had come before me and all that would come after. The cycles of creation and dissolution, of birth and death, were not separate from me but part of my own unfolding. I saw how the boundaries I had once believed fixed and immovable were, in truth, like shadows cast by passing clouds, temporary, shifting, dissolving in the light of awareness. This revelation filled me with a deep peace, a freedom that transcended all fear and limitation. The garden had shown me that to live without limits was to embrace the mystery of life fully, to trust in the unseen forces that guide us even when the path is unclear. It was to move beyond the narrow confines of ego and thought, stepping into the vast openness of the heart where love, compassion, and understanding flow freely. Here, in this infinite space, I was free to be wholly myself, imperfect, vulnerable, radiant, without judgment or fear. I began to walk slowly through the darkened garden, each step a meditation, each breath a prayer. The trees whispered softly in the night breeze, their leaves shimmering silver under the moonlight. The flowers, now closed for the night, held their secrets in delicate folds, resting until dawn. The air was rich with the scent of earth and rain, of wild herbs and ancient wood. Every detail was a testament to the garden's endless complexity and beauty, a reminder that life's richness is found not in control or certainty but in openness and wonder. As I wandered, memories of my own journey surfaced, the moments of joy and despair, of love and loss, of hope and surrender. I saw how each experience, no matter how small or great, had been a step along the path to this realization, that the garden of the world has no limits except those we place within our minds. And I understood that this was both an invitation and a challenge, to keep breaking free from the walls of fear and limitation, to keep expanding the horizon of my being, to keep cultivating the boundless garden within. I came to a quiet pool where the moon's reflection shimmered like liquid silver. Kneeling beside it, I gazed into the depths, seeing my own face mingled with the stars and shadows. In that mirror, I saw the unity of all things, the self and the other, the finite and the infinite, the known and the unknown. I touched the water gently, feeling its coolness ripple through me, and I felt the garden's heart beating within my own. In that sacred moment, I made a vow to live each day as a gardener of the soul, tending to the wild, beautiful, limitless garden that dwells within every heart. To nurture love where there is fear, to cultivate patience where there is haste, to harvest wisdom from every experience, no matter how humble. To remember always that the only true limits are those imagined, and that beyond them lies an endless expanse of possibility, waiting to be embraced. Rising from the pool, I walked back toward the garden's gate, now faintly outlined against the starlit sky. I carried with me the stillness of the night, the fragrance of earth and blossom, the quiet strength of ancient stones. The garden was no longer just a place, it was a living presence within me, a wellspring of freedom and grace that I could return to at any moment, no matter where life's journey led. As I stepped through the gate and into the wider world, I felt a deep gratitude swell within my chest. The garden had given me a priceless gift, the knowledge that my soul was limitless, that my spirit could soar beyond all boundaries, that the vastness of the world was mirrored in the boundlessness of my own heart. And with that gift came a sacred responsibility, to live fully, to love fiercely, to be open always to the infinite garden of possibility that unfolds with every breath. The night embraced me, stars shimmering like lanterns in the dark, and I knew that the garden's song would echo within me forever, a timeless melody of freedom, love, and endless becoming. Even now, as I recount this journey, I feel the gentle pulse of that boundless garden beating beneath the surface of my awareness. It calls me to remember that life is not a puzzle to be solved or a fortress to be defended, but a living mystery to be embraced with courage and joy. Each moment offers a chance to step beyond the self-imposed limits, to shed the veils of doubt and fear, and to step into the radiant light of possibility. I carry this truth with me into the waking world, where challenges arise like storms on the horizon. Yet, armed with the garden's wisdom, I face them not with resistance but with grace. I know now that no obstacle can truly confine me unless I allow it to, that within me lies a limitless expanse as vast and wild as the garden itself. This awareness transforms fear into courage, limitation into opportunity, and isolation into connection. And so, I walk onward, a humble gardener tending the soil of my soul, planting seeds of love, kindness, and understanding wherever I go. I water them with patience, nourish them with hope, and trust in the unseen forces that bring forth bloom after bloom. The garden of the world has no limits except those within my mind, and in that boundless truth, I find my freedom, my purpose, and my endless home.